Wyoming Territory, June of 1879. The wind was dry and sharp, carrying dust through the empty main street of Sweetwater Springs. And at the top of the church steps sat a bride with her white dress wrinkled like crumpled paper and her veil tossed beside her like it meant nothing anymore. Cassidy Dyer pressed her palms into her face, shoulders shaking. She didn't care that the townsfolk had already stopped whispering and gone back to their lives. Her heart had been gutted clean in front of them all. She stayed right there on the steps, her bouquet forgotten behind her, the front doors of the church still wide open to an altar that never saw vows. The sun beat hot on her back, but she did not move. A horse's hooves clopped slow down the street. Then they stopped. She heard spurs hit dirt and boots step close. She did not look up. A quiet voice said, "You want me to shoot him or ride you somewhere?" Cassidy blinked through her tears and turned her head. The man standing there looked like he belonged more to the land than the town. Tall, lean, dust on his hat and jacket. His hair was a little too long around his ears, and his eyes clear and steady held no pity, just calm, like he had seen worse than a ruined wedding. "I do not need a gun," she whispered, her voice brittle. "Just away." He sat beside her without asking. His coat brushed her skirts. "I'm Thatcher Price," he said. "I was just getting supplies. Saw the mess." Cassidy swallowed hard. Cassidy Dyer. Or, I guess not Cassidy Latimer. He did not ask why the groom left. She was grateful. Instead, he nodded toward her bare feet. "You forgot your shoes." "My groom took them," she said with a broken laugh. "Said he bought them. Said I was just pretending to be better than I am. Rode off with the wagon, my bag, and my shoes." Thatcher looked down the road like he might go after him after all. Then said, "You want to ride anywhere?" She stared at him. "Anywhere," he repeated, quiet, like it was the most natural thing a man could offer. Cassidy looked at the empty church one last time. "Yes." He stood, offered a hand down. She took it. His horse, a tall roan gelding, was tethered at the post nearby. He had a bedroll, a rifle, a canteen. No baggage but what he carried on his back. "I do not have anything," she said softly, suddenly realizing how bare she was. No bag, no money, no plan. "You have yourself," he said. "That's enough." He helped her up behind him. She held to the saddle horn, then to him, her fingers curling into the worn leather of his vest. They rode out of Sweetwater Springs without looking back. By nightfall they had made it 15 miles west, toward the foothills. Thatcher set up a small fire near a stream, let his horse graze, and offered her his coat. Cassidy sat on a flat rock, her knees pulled up, the hem of her dress muddy. She said nothing for a long time. Thatcher handed her a tin cup of coffee. "This is all I have." She took it with both hands. "It's more than anyone has given me today." He sat across from her, watching the flames. "You going east or west?" "I do not know," she said. "I came here from Illinois. My uncle sent for me. Said there was opportunity. He set me up with that man. Said I was too old to be picky." "How old are you?" he asked. 22. He nodded. Cassidy took a sip of the coffee. It was strong and bitter and perfect. "And you?" 28. She looked at him over the rim of the cup. "You always ride around saving crying brides?" "No," he said, a small smile in his voice. "This is my first." She smiled, just barely, pulled at something in her chest. They camped again the next night, and the next, following no trail. She did not ask where they were going, and he did not say. He taught her how to find kindling, how to make flatbread from cornmeal, how to wrap her feet in strips of cloth until they could trade for boots. On the third day, he traded his old saddle blanket for a pair of 2 big women's boots in a mining town. "Why are you helping me?" she asked that night, her voice soft in the dark. He looked at her across the fire. Because you needed help. That simple? He nodded once. That simple. Cassidy watched the way he moved, quiet, purposeful, gentle. He never asked more than she could give, never pushed her to talk. But every night, he sat across from her and listened, even when she had nothing to say. On the 5th morning, Cassidy woke before dawn. She walked to the stream and looked at her reflection. Her hair was tangled, her dress torn, her cheeks sunburned, but her eyes looked clearer than they had in months, maybe longer. Thatcher was already awake, rolling up the bedroll. She walked over. "Can I ask something?" "Sure." "What were you doing in Sweetwater Springs?" He paused. "Looking for something." She tilted her head. "Did you find it?" He looked at her then, really looked at her. "I might have." Her cheeks warmed. She looked away, heart loud in her chest. They rode again that day through cottonwood groves and soft hills. She sat closer now, her arm brushing his. When the wind picked up and her veil still tied around her waist flew loose, he caught it before it hit the ground and tied it to her saddle horn. She watched his hands. Strong, steady. She wanted to touch them. That night, the fire burned low between them and the silence was full of something new. "I was not really in love with him," she said. Thatcher looked up. "I thought I should be, but I was more afraid of being alone than I was sure about him." He waited. "But I am not afraid now," she said, voice barely above a whisper. He stood up, walked around the fire and sat beside her. "Close. You do not have to be," he said. She turned to him, heart thudding. "I do not want to run anymore." He reached up, brushed her hair from her face. "Then stay." She leaned into him, her hand on his chest. "Only if you ask me." He smiled. "Cassidy Dyer, will you stay with me?" She kissed him. Quiet. "Sure." And he kissed her back like he had been waiting his whole life. They reached the high basin country by midsummer, where the grass grew long and thick and the streams ran cold even in July. The air smelled of pine and juniper, and the sky stretched wide enough to hold anything. Cassidy rode beside Thatcher now, not behind, her hands steady on the reins of the bay mare he'd traded for in Rawlins. Her boots second-hand but stout fit well enough, and she had a new dress of rough calico, sewn by a ranch wife who'd owed Thatcher a favor. She had not worn white since Sweetwater. They stopped at a ridge above a valley where cattle grazed free between low hills. Smoke curled from a distant cabin tucked near a grove of cottonwoods. Thatcher dismounted and shaded his eyes. "That's the Miller's spread," he said. "They're good people. Gave me work years back." "Are we stopping?" Cassidy asked, brushing dust from her sleeves. He nodded. "They need help with branding. I figured we could stay a while." She didn't ask what came after. She had learned not to borrow tomorrow's weight. At the Miller's ranch, they were met by a woman with a kerchief tied over her hair and a rifle across her back. "You're late," she said without heat, then pulled Thatcher into a quick, firm hug. "And you brought someone." Cassidy dismounted and offered her hand. "I'm Alice," the woman said. "You can call me Ma if you stay long enough." Cassidy smiled. "Cassidy Dyer." "Well, Cassidy Dyer," Alice said, eyeing her boots and the lines of her face. "You know how to cook for 12 and wash with ash water?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. You'll do fine." That night, Cassidy sat on the back stoop peeling potatoes while the sky turned lavender. Inside, Alice scolded one of her sons for tracking mud across the floorboards. The sound made Cassidy ache, though she didn't know if it was longing or relief. Thatcher sat on the stoop beside her and took up a knife. He started peeling in smooth, practiced strokes, his hands sure. "How long did you ride for them?" she asked. 3 summers. Helped build the barn too." She glanced sideways. "And you just left?" "I leave when I feel the road calling," he said. "But I never stop riding back." Cassidy tilted her head. You write letters? He nodded. To folks who don't mind plain words. Alice keeps them all in a tin box. She smiled. I'd like to read one. He handed her a finished potato. Maybe I'll write one for you instead. They worked until the bowl was full, shoulders touching, the air warm with the scent of evening sage. The next days passed in rhythm. Cassidy rose early, helped Alice with the cooking, swept dust from the floor, and learned how to spot a sick calf before it stumbled. She took to baking cornbread in a Dutch oven and whistling while she worked, though the tune was never quite the same. Thatcher spent his days in the pens, roping and branding, sweat darkening his shirt in wide patches. He came in late, quiet, and always found her before supper. Not with words, but with a glance that lingered too long to be anything but certain. One evening, Cassidy found him at the edge of the paddock, mending a broken gate latch by lamplight. You always work like something's chasing you, she said. He didn't pause. Maybe it is. She leaned against the post. What would it be? He set the hammer down. Regret, maybe weariness, or the thought I've never stayed anywhere long enough to be missed. She walked to him, the grass soft underfoot. You could stay now. He looked at her, not with surprise, but something quieter. Like he'd been waiting for the offer to be real. You'd want that? He asked. I'm not a girl in a white dress anymore, she said. I'm not waiting to be chosen. I'm saying I want to choose. He stepped closer. And you'd choose me? She nodded. Every morning, if you let me. Thatcher's hands came to rest on her waist, hesitantly at first. Then with that same surety he used to guide a horse or steady a beam. I'd let you, he said. She rested her forehead against his chest. His heartbeat was slow and solid beneath her cheek. They stayed like that until the lamp burned low and the stars blinked awake above them. Later that night, back in the room Alice had given her, Cassidy lay awake listening to the wind move through the trees. For the first time in many weeks, her thoughts did not race ahead or dwell behind. They settled in the space between heartbeats, in the warmth of a man who had not promised her the world, only a place beside him. And that, she realized, was more than she had ever hoped to have. The harvest moon rose fat and gold over the valley, and the last of August's warmth lingered in the cottonwoods. Cassidy stood in the barn's loft, her hands dusted with grain, watching the cattle settle below like dark stones scattered across the field. The quiet was full, not empty, and she let it press against her chest a while. Below, the lanterns had been lit, and the ranch hands' voices drifted in from the bunkhouse. She could pick out Thatcher's low drawl when he spoke, the slow rhythm of a man who never hurried his words. She liked that about him, that he never rushed, never filled silences just to ease them. She climbed down the ladder, careful not to catch her hem on the rough wood. The night air cooled her cheeks as she crossed the yard, heading for the shed where Alice kept her preserves. The summer peaches needed sorting, and Cassidy had offered more for the piece of it than the chore. Inside, the lantern hissed gently. She crouched beside the crates and ran her fingertips over the fuzzed skin of each fruit, setting aside the ones that had softened too far. The door creaked open behind her. You always work this late? Thatcher asked, leaning against the frame. I like the quiet, she said without turning. It's honest. He stepped inside. Alice says you've got a knack for keeping things from spoiling. I've had practice, she said. Some things just need to be handled right. He crouched beside her, picking up a peach, turning it once in his palm. You think people are the same? She looked at him. I think some are. Some just bruise easy. Doesn't mean they're not good underneath. He set the peach down gently. You afraid of bruising? She shook her head. I've already been bruised. What I'm afraid of is never being trusted to heal. He looked at her, and the quiet stretched again, but this time it was warm between them. "I've watched the way you carry yourself," he said. "You're not running anymore." "No," she said, voice low. "I'm not." He reached for her hand, brushed his fingers along the back of it, rough-skinned and sure. "I've been thinking," he said. "There's a parcel of land west of here. Belongs to nobody yet. Creek runs through it. Pines all along the north edge." She watched his face, the way his eyes didn't waver. "I could file a claim," he said. "Build something real." She squeezed his hand. "Would you want me there?" "I wouldn't want to build it without you." The breath caught in her chest, not from surprise, but from how right it felt, like something she'd almost forgotten the shape of. "I can sew curtains," she said, "and plant carrots, and I'll keep the peaches from spoiling." He smiled, not with his mouth but with the corners of his eyes. "That's all I'd ask." They walked back to the house together. The moonlight was bright enough to cast their shadows long across the grass. He didn't let go of her hand. Inside, Alice sat by the stove, knitting in the dim light. She looked up once, saw their joined hands, gave a quiet nod, and went back to her work. Upstairs, Cassidy folded her dress over the back of the chair and braided her hair by the window. She could hear the night insects chittering, the low creak of the porch boards as Thatcher paced once before heading to the bunkhouse. She touched the windowsill, the wood worn smooth by years of weather and work. Tomorrow they'd ride into town, file the claim, pick up supplies. Alice had offered them a wagon and blankets. Cassidy looked out at the dark, at the hills that rose like shoulders against the sky. Somewhere out there, a stretch of land waited, not for a bride or a cowboy, but for two people who had chosen each other, not because they had nothing else, but because in all the wide country, they'd found something worth building on. And beneath her palm, the windowsill felt like home already. By mid-September, the first frost curled the edges of the cottonwood leaves, and the color bled from green to gold. Cassidy stood at the edge of their claim, shawl drawn close, watching as Thatcher drove the final post into the fence line. Each strike of the mallet rang out sharp in the morning air, echoing off the slope behind them. The cabin stood strong behind her, small but solid, cedar logs notched and daubed tight. It hadn't come easy, each beam dragged and lifted by hand, each shingle split with care, but it stood straight now, with a stone hearth and a door that closed against the wind. She'd sewn new curtains from the bolt of fabric Alice insisted they take, and their bed was layered thick with wool and down. Thatcher's coat hung on a peg beside hers. She hadn't asked him to put it there. He just had. "You want the last post straight?" he called, glancing over his shoulder. She walked down the slope to stand beside him, the grass brittle beneath her boots. "Straight," she said, "like the rest." He adjusted it a finger's width, then drove it deep. They stood together for a moment, breath misting in the chill. The creek behind them ran smooth and low, and beyond the fence, their two milk cows grazed, heads down. "I never saw myself building fences," he said, wiping his brow. "I never saw myself planting turnips," she said. "But here we are." He looked at her then, something quiet and satisfied in his eyes. "Do you miss the road?" she asked. He took off his hat, scratched the back of his neck. "Sometimes I miss the quiet of it, the way it doesn't ask anything of you." She nodded. "And this place does." He looked out over the land. "It does. But I think I need to be needed now." She reached out, laced her fingers through his. "It's not the same thing as being trapped." "No," he said, "it's not." They walked the fence line together, checking each post as they went. The sun crept higher, burning off the frost, and the scent of turned earth rose around them. At the barn, Cassidy reached for the feed sack while Thatcher checked the latch. Inside, the chickens clucked low, already scratching at the straw. "I saw a wagon pass the ridge trail yesterday," he said. Family with a baby. Looked like they were heading toward the Snake River. Think they'll settle? She asked. Hard to say. The land's not easy west of here. She poured feed into the trough. Maybe they'll make it. Maybe they've got each other. He looked at her, his voice softer. That makes all the difference. Later, while the stew simmered on the hearth and the cabin filled with the smell of onion and meat, Cassidy sat at the table sorting seeds into small muslin pouches. She had taken to keeping a ledger, carefully noting what they'd planted, what had sprouted, and what she'd try again come spring. Thatcher came in, brushing straw from his sleeves. He set a folded piece of paper on the table beside her. What's this? Letter from Alice. Rode out to the mail shack while you were baking. She wiped her hands and opened it slowly. She says the youngest boy caught a fever but came through, and she wants to know if we'll come for Christmas. He leaned against the doorframe. You want to? She smiled. I'd like that. His voice was quiet. It'd be the first time I stayed in one place long enough to mark a holiday. She stood and crossed to him, resting her hands on his chest. Then we'll mark it, she said, with pine boughs and warm bread and your coat hung by the fire. He wrapped his arms around her, the heat of him grounding. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the trees, but the walls held firm. That night they ate by lamplight, the table small but theirs. Afterward, Thatcher brought out a fiddle from the cabin's corner, its case worn but cared for. You never told me you played. He sat, tuning the strings by ear. Didn't know if I still could. The first notes came slow, uncertain, but soon the melody took shape, an Appalachian waltz, mournful and sweet. Cassidy stood in the center of the room, hands clasped in front of her. Dance with me, she said. He set the fiddle aside and pulled her close. They moved in a slow circle, the fire casting their shadows long across the floorboards. No words passed between them, only the rhythm of steps and the beat of hearts steady and sure. When the song ended, she rested her cheek against his shoulder. Is this what peace feels like? She murmured. He kissed her temple. If it isn't, I don't need to know different. Outside, the first snow came silent, dusting the earth in white. Inside, the warmth held, and their quiet life began to root deep. The days shortened. By late October, the sun dipped behind the ridge before supper, and frost clung to the grass until midday. Cassidy spent the early hours near the hearth, kneading dough while the fire warmed the floorboards. She'd taken to humming low as she worked, not songs she knew, just shapes of sound rising and falling in rhythm with her hands. Thatcher had rigged a pulley over the well, so she didn't strain her back lifting water. She hadn't asked him to. He'd just noticed the way she leaned on the edge after drawing up the bucket one morning and said nothing, only brought out his tools that afternoon and fixed it. She found herself watching him more now, not just the way he moved, but the way he listened. When she spoke, he turned fully, as if every word mattered. She hadn't known what that felt like until him. One cold morning, she found him outside with a bolt of canvas stretched across the wagon frame. "What's that for?" she asked, gathering her shawl tighter against her shoulders. "Shelter for the calves," he said, tying a knot with gloved fingers. "If it turns wet, they'll need cover." She stepped closer. "You always think ahead." He straightened, his breath clouding the air. "Not always, but I do now." Her hand found his sleeve. "I notice." That afternoon, she wrote a letter by oil lamp, her pen careful on the page. It was for her uncle back in Illinois, though she hadn't heard from him since the day she arrived in Sweetwater Springs. Still, she felt something settle in her chest as she folded the paper and sealed it with wax. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was no longer weight. She gave the letter to a trader passing through with salted pork and a sack of cornmeal. "If it finds its way, it finds its way," she told Thatcher afterward. "That's all a letter can do," he said. They passed the first snow tucked in close to the hearth. Cassidy read aloud from a book Alice had sent, her voice soft and steady, while Thatcher worked a leather strap in his lap, stitching the torn handle of her grain sack. When the wind howled, they didn't speak of it, just drew the curtains and moved a little closer. One morning, she found a sprig of dried wild mint on the table beside her cup. She hadn't seen any growing since the warm months, and she suspected he'd kept it hidden until now. She tucked it in the crook of her apron, over her heart, and only said, "Thank you." A week before the holiday, they rode to the Miller Ranch. The sky was gray, but the road was clear, and the horses moved easy under them. Cassidy carried a jar of apple preserves she'd cooked down with cloves and vinegar. It was the first thing she'd made without a recipe, just by taste and memory. Alice met them at the gate, her hands stained with flour, and took Cassidy into a long, wordless hug. There was warmth in the house, noise from children chasing each other across the floor, and the scent of pine needles steeped in hot water for washing. Thatcher helped the older boys mend a broken axle in the barn, while Cassidy stitched new cuffs onto Alice's best apron. After supper, with snow falling again, they stayed the night in the loft room, curled beneath quilts that smelled faintly of cedar. In the morning, before they saddled the horses, Alice pressed a folded shawl into Cassidy's arms. "I made it before the frost," she said. "Thought it might suit you come spring." Cassidy ran her fingers over the fine weave. "It's beautiful. I'll keep it close." They rode home quiet, the cold sinking into their coats. At the cabin, Thatcher stabled the horses while Cassidy banked the fire and set the kettle on. She stood at the window, watching the trees sway under snow weight. When he came in, brushing off his collar, she crossed the room and placed her hands gently at his sides. "I've been thinking," she said. He raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I want to plant plum trees," she said. "Come spring. 2 of them. 1 for each window." He looked toward the wall behind her, where the morning light always landed. "They'd catch the sun there." She nodded. "And I want to build a root cellar, and maybe someday teach a neighbor's child how to read, if they've got no school to go to." His hand came up, cupping her cheek with the same care he used to lift a newborn calf. "You've got plans." "I do," she said. "And I want you in every one of them." He kissed her, then not hurried, not uncertain, just steady. And when he pulled back, his thumb brushed beneath her eye. "I've never had a place feel like mine before," he said. "But this, it's ours." That night, she stitched the mint sprig into the hem of her new shawl. Stayed hidden, but she knew it was there. Like every piece of care he gave, quiet and steady and lasting. The snow deepened, the land rested, and inside their cabin, 2 lives moved forward, not rushed, not uncertain. Built, day by day, with hands and heart and the long-earned knowing that they were no longer lost. They belonged to the land, to the work, and most of all, to each other.